It started as just another prime-time interview. A famous TV host, a carefully planned setup, and millions of viewers waiting for the next viral moment. Except this time, everything backfired. Madeline Carter, a liberal talk show host, known for her aggressive interviews, had her sights set on Clint Eastwood. The goal? Make him look outdated, irrelevant, and out of touch. With her network backing her, an audience primed to laugh at all the right moments, and a list of pre-approved talking points designed to corner him, she thought she had it all figured out. But there was just one problem. She underestimated Clint Eastwood. What happened next wasn't just an awkward exchange. It was a full-blown, career-ending disaster. By the time the interview was over, the audience had turned on her, social media was in chaos, and the network was scrambling to control the fallout. Within days, Madeline Carter's career was over. The network had no choice but to fire her. And Clint? He walked away stronger than ever. Before we get into today's story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Now let's get started. The studio lights beamed down as Clint Eastwood took his seat, adjusting his jacket with the same calm confidence he had carried throughout his entire career. Across from him sat Madeline Carter, a TV host notorious for her aggressive, slanted interviews. She wasn't here for an honest conversation. She was here to destroy him. Behind the scenes, the network had planned every detail. The segment was framed as a discussion on Hollywood's changing culture, but everyone in the industry knew what that really meant. A staged takedown. The producers had briefed Madeline on how to steer the conversation, how to push Clint until he cracked, and, most importantly, how to twist his words to fit their pre-written narrative. The audience had been carefully selected, filled with hand-picked spectators who were encouraged to laugh, cheer, and boo at all the right moments. A few even had scripted reactions, ready to make it seem like Clint's views were out of touch. The teleprompter in front of Madeline had notes on exactly when to interrupt, when to mock, and when to push harder. As the countdown to air began, Madeline smirked at her guest. She had done this before, invited high-profile figures onto her show, lured them into a false sense of security, then ripped them apart on live television. The cameras went live. "Clint, let's be honest," Madeline began, flashing her signature fake smile. "You've built your career on playing strong, rugged men. But in today's world, don't you think that kind of masculinity is outdated?" A few snickers rippled through the audience. She wasn't asking a real question. She was setting the trap. The second Clint defended himself, she would frame him as resistant to change. If he didn't, she would paint him as weak. Either way, she expected to win. But what Madeline didn't realize, she had just made the biggest mistake of her career. Because Clint Eastwood wasn't just some Hollywood actor, he was a living legend. And tonight, she wasn't the one in control. The moment Clint Eastwood opened his mouth to respond, Madeline Carter struck. She cut him off before he could finish his first sentence, flashing her signature smug grin. "I mean, let's be real here, Clint," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "The days of the silent, tough guy are long gone. Don't you think men like you have had their time?" The audience laughed on cue. It was exactly how the producers had planned it. They didn't want a conversation. They wanted a performance. And Clint, he was supposed to be the punching bag. The ambush begins, cutting Clint off at every turn. Clint sat back, watching her, completely unfazed. "See, that's an interesting way to put it," he started, but before he could finish, Madeline interrupted again. Interesting, or outdated, she shot back, tilting her head with a smirk. Come on, Clint, be honest. You're part of an era that doesn't fit anymore. Don't you think Hollywood and the world has moved past your kind of masculinity? More laughter, more snickers. The audience had been trained to react at all the right moments. Clint sighed. He had seen this before. This wasn't about a discussion. This was about humiliation. The comedy trick, turning the audience against him. Madeline turned towards the crowd, her voice taking on a light, almost playful tone. It was a tactic as old as television itself. Mock the guest, turn them into a joke, and let the audience do the rest. You know what I think? She said, grinning. I think Clint Eastwood is still living in one of his old westerns. Any minute now, I expect him to pull out a cowboy hat and say something like, "Back in my day, men were men." The audience roared with laughter. Someone in the back whistled. Madeline basked in it. This was what she lived for. Clint, still calm, still unshaken, but she wasn't done yet. The loaded question, pushing for a viral soundbite. Madeline adjusted her microphone and leaned in, lowering her voice slightly. The classic serious moment act. Clint, she said, shaking her head, do you ever think that maybe, just maybe, men like you have done more harm than good? Gasps from the audience. Madeline's eyes gleamed. This was it. If Clint got defensive, he would be painted as angry. If he denied it, he would be painted as delusional. If he didn't answer at all, they would call it guilt. It was a no-win situation, or so she thought. Clint finally leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't change his expression. But when he spoke, the entire room shifted. Clint fires back. The game changes. Clint tilted his head slightly, eyes locked onto Madeline, and then he smiled. A small, knowing smile, the kind that said, I've seen people like you before. Let me ask you something, he said, voice steady. You ever see a firefighter run out of a burning building because he needed to process his emotions? The audience went silent. Madeline blinked. You ever see a soldier in combat drop his weapon to have a moment of vulnerability? Madeline's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Clint sat back. Because last time I checked, the world doesn't run on feelings. It runs on people who show up when it matters. People who take the hit and keep moving forward. A single clap came from the audience, then another. Madeline's grip on her cue cards tightened. This was not how it was supposed to go. Rebecca's desperation, the narrative is slipping. She forced a chuckle, shifting uncomfortably in her chair. Okay, Clint, but let's be real. Your movies, they glorify violence. They push this outdated tough guy image. Don't you think Hollywood should be encouraging a more, let's say, progressive kind of hero? Clint smirked. You ever see a movie where the hero saves the world by filling out paperwork? Laughter, real laughter, not just from the audience, but from the crew, the cameraman, even some of Madeline's own staff. Her face turned red. She had to regain control. Fast, the overreach, Madeline's fatal mistake. She leaned in, trying to get Clint back on the defensive. Look, Clint, she said, voice sharper now. Isn't it fair to say that men like you, old school, hyper-masculine, unwilling to change, are part of the reason society has so many problems today? Silence. The kind that makes people shift in their seats. Clint tapped his fingers on the armrest. Then, without a trace of anger, he spoke. You ever see a building being demolished? He asked. Madeline blinked. What? Clint nodded. Takes what? A few seconds to bring the whole thing down? A couple of charges, a button press, and boom, it's gone. Madeline frowned. I don't see what this has to do with... But you ever watch one being built? Madeline froze. The audience leaned in. Clint continued. That takes years. Brick by brick, steel by steel, men working day and night, laying the foundation, making sure it's strong enough to hold. His eyes locked onto hers. The people with the detonators don't care about that. They don't think about the work, the sweat, the risk. They just want to see it come crashing down. Dead silence. A low whistle came from the back of the room. Even some of Madeline's producers exchanged looks. She had lost the room, and she knew it. The moment goes viral. Clint just ended the debate. Before the interview even ended, clips were already flooding the internet. Clint Eastwood destroys liberal host in the most savage way possible. The moment Madeline Carter realized she lost. This is why legends never die. The audience wasn't laughing at Clint anymore. They were laughing at her. And Madeline? She could feel it slipping away, her credibility, her authority, her career, because this wasn't just an interview anymore. This was the moment everything changed. The moment Clint Eastwood finished speaking, the atmosphere in the studio shifted. What had started as a carefully orchestrated ambush was now slipping out of Madeline Carter's control. The audience, who had been laughing on cue, was now silent. Even some of the producers, the very people who had planned this takedown, were exchanging uneasy glances. Madeline could feel it. The moment was slipping away. She wasn't winning anymore. And the worst part, Clint wasn't even trying. The audience starts turning. Clint gains control. Clint sat back in his chair, completely relaxed, as if he had already won. He studied Madeline for a moment, then let out a small chuckle. You know what's funny? He said, voice calm. I've been sitting here this whole time, answering your questions, letting you talk. Meanwhile, you've interrupted me, 5, 6 times. A few chuckles from the audience. Madeline's smile twitched. She needed to shut this down. She forced a laugh. Oh, Clint, come on. Let's not act like I've been unfair. Clint raised an eyebrow. Haven't you? The chuckles in the audience got louder. Madeline gripped her cue cards. She wasn't used to this. She was supposed to be in control. She always was. Not today. Madeline tries to recover. But Clint flips the script. She needed to push back. Fast. She cleared her throat and leaned forward. All right, Clint, she said, voice sharper now. Let's be honest. The world is changing, and people are realizing that this old-school idea of masculinity, this tough guy, no emotion, never back down, attitude, is actually part of the problem. Don't you think it's time for men like you to step aside? Gasps. A few nervous laughs from the audience. The trap was set. If Clint fought back too hard, he'd look angry and defensive. If he agreed, he'd validate her argument. If he said nothing, he'd be seen as weak. No good options. Or so she thought. Clint slowly tilted his head, smirked. Then he fired back. Clint's response. That shattered the interview. You ever see a mother work 3 jobs to feed her kids? Madeline blinked. What? A mother? Clint repeated, voice steady. You ever see one work 2, 3 jobs just to put food on the table, to keep a roof over her kids' heads? Madeline hesitated. I suppose, but... That's toughness, Clint said. You ever see a firefighter run into a burning building when everyone else is running out? Madeline opened her mouth, but no words came out. You ever see a soldier in combat? Clint continued. A cop on the street? A factory worker who pulls double shifts just so his family doesn't go hungry? He let the words sink in. Then he leaned forward, looking Madeline dead in the eye. And you're telling me toughness is the problem? The audience erupted, clapping, cheering. Even some of Madeline's own staff were nodding. Madeline's face turned red. She had lost control. The overreach, Madeline's fatal mistake. This was not how it was supposed to go. Madeline needed to regain power. And so, she pushed too far. She rolled her eyes. Oh, please, Clint. You're just playing to the crowd right now. You're avoiding the real issue. The world doesn't need men like you anymore. Gasps. Even the producers backstage froze. That was a mistake. Clint's expression didn't change, but his next words ended her career. Clint drops the final hammer. He exhaled slowly. You ever see a building being demolished? Madeline frowned. What does that have to do with... Takes a few seconds, doesn't it? Clint continued. Push a button, set off some charges, and the whole thing comes crashing down. Madeline blinked, confused. I don't... But you ever watch one being built? Clint asked. Silence. The audience leaned in. Clint nodded. That takes years. Brick by brick, steel by steel, men working day and night, laying the foundation, making sure it's strong enough to hold. He tilted his head. The people who tear things down, they don't care about that. They don't think about the effort, the work, the sweat. They just want to see it fall. The audience went wild. Even some of the show's crew members clapped. Madeline froze. She had lost them. Completely. The internet reacts. Clint just ended the debate. Before the interview even ended, clips were already flooding social media. Clint Eastwood destroys liberal host in the most savage way possible. The moment Madeline Carter realized she lost, this is why legends never die. The comment sections were ruthless. She thought she was going to embarrass him. She embarrassed herself. He didn't even get angry. He just calmly ended her career. Clint Eastwood walked in a guest and left a legend. And Madeline? She could feel it. The trap she had set for Clint had snapped shut on her instead. She glanced at the producers off stage. Their faces were pale, because they all knew one thing. This wasn't just an awkward interview. This was a career-ending disaster. The network goes into full-blown panic mode. Ratings were crashing. Sponsors were reconsidering their contracts. Even other journalists were turning against Madeline. Then came the worst possible news. Major sponsor pulls support from network after controversial interview. Boom. Millions lost overnight. The network tried to put out a statement. We value all perspectives and regret that tensions ran high during this interview. Nobody bought it. Madeline's face was now the symbol of media corruption. And the worst part, Clint didn't have to do a thing. They had done it to themselves. Clint walks away, untouched and stronger than ever. A few days later, a reporter caught up with Clint at a public event. Mr. Eastwood, what do you think about everything that happened? Clint smirked, took a sip of his coffee and said, they did it to themselves. Mic drop. The clip instantly went viral. Clint Eastwood just summed up the entire case in 4 words. He didn't just win, he changed the game forever. This is why you never mess with a legend. And just like that, the fight was over. But the fallout was just beginning. Madeline Carter had walked into the interview expecting a victory. She had the questions prepared, the audience primed, the producers backing her. Instead, she had set her own career on fire. And now, the world was watching it burn. Social media goes nuclear. Donna Madeline exposed trends worldwide. Even before the interview ended, clips were already going viral. Clint Eastwood shuts down, liberal host in most savage way possible. Madeline Carter thought she could trap Clint. Big mistake. The exact moment her career died on live TV. Within hours, the hashtag #, Madeline Exposed, was trending #1 worldwide. By morning, Clint wins, media manipulation, cancel Madeline, Carter millions of tweets, millions of views, and the comments, absolutely brutal. This wasn't an interview, this was an ambush, and she lost. Clint didn't even raise his voice. That's how you know he won. Notice how she was the one interrupting, not him. Even people who didn't usually agree with Clint were admitting the truth. I'm no Eastwood fan, but wow, he handled that like a pro. She got played at her own game, no sympathy. And the worst part, even her own supporters were turning against her. Sponsors start pulling out. We can't be associated with this. Inside the network's headquarters, panic mode was in full effect. The producers knew the backlash was bad, but they had no idea how bad. Then, the first major sponsor pulled out. We do not wish to be associated with a program that engages in deceptive and biased journalism. Effective immediately, we are ending our sponsorship. Boom. Millions gone overnight. And once one sponsor jumped ship, the rest followed. By noon, 3 more major advertisers had backed out. By the next morning, nearly half of the show's sponsors were gone. Network executives were scrambling to stop the financial bleeding. They issued a carefully worded statement. We value open and honest discussions. While tensions ran high during the interview, we regret any misinterpretations and remain committed to journalistic integrity. Translation: please, sponsors, don't leave us. But it was too late. The show had lost credibility, and the network knew it. Madeline Carter tries to defend herself. It backfires. Instantly desperate to save herself, Madeline went on Twitter. She posted a long, dramatic thread. The way people are attacking me over this interview is disgusting. This is exactly why media figures are afraid to challenge outdated ideas because of toxic online mobs. Big mistake. The replies? Brutal. Oh, now you want to talk about toxic mobs after spending years trying to cancel others? You played stupid games. Now you're winning stupid prizes. Madeline, just take the L. You got humbled on live TV. Then came the final nail in the coffin. A clip leaked from before the interview, hot mic footage from the production team. Madeline could be heard laughing with producers saying, "We just need to push him until he snaps. The audience will eat it up." Boom. This wasn't journalism. It was a hit job. And now, the world knew it. Celebrities and politicians joined the conversation. The scandal was too big to ignore. Hollywood began taking sides. Famous actors, directors, and public figures started weighing in. Clint Eastwood just reminded everyone why he's a legend, famous actor tweet. Madeline Carter played herself. End of story. Popular political commentator. This is why people don't trust the media anymore. Former TV host. Even some liberal figures admitted Madeline had gone too far. I don't always agree with Clint, but yeah, this was a bad look for the press. Cutting off guests, twisting words. This is exactly why journalism is dying. And then came the worst blow. A US senator tweeted, "What happened to Clint Eastwood is exactly why people don't trust the media. This was an ambush, not an interview." A sitting senator just called out the media. Oh, this is bad. Madeline wasn't just losing credibility in Hollywood. She was losing credibility at the national level. The network tries to save face, but it's too late. Inside the network headquarters, executives were scrambling. Emergency PR teams were deployed. Producers were ordered to find old clips of Clint Eastwood being problematic to shift the narrative. Legal teams were preparing for potential lawsuits. Then came the official network statement. We acknowledge that tensions ran high during the interview. While we value diverse perspectives, we regret how the conversation unfolded and will be reviewing our interview practices moving forward. Too late. The internet wasn't buying it. Because by now, Madeline Carter's reputation was in ruins. Her show was hemorrhaging sponsors. The network was facing real consequences. They had spent years controlling the narrative. Now, the narrative was controlling them. And the worst part? It wasn't over yet. Because now, Clint Eastwood was preparing a lawsuit. Clint Eastwood speaks out. The final blow for days, Clint had stayed silent. He didn't need to post online. He didn't need a PR team. He didn't need to play the victim. Because he had already won. But when reporters finally caught up with him, he gave them just 3 words. They did it themselves. Mic drop. The clip, instantly viral. Clint Eastwood just ended the media in 3 words. He didn't just win, he changed the game forever. This is why you never mess with a legend. And just like that, the fight was over. But the legal battle was just beginning. Madeline Carter thought the storm would pass. She had faced backlash before, weathered controversies, and always managed to land on her feet. But this time, there was no way out. Because now, Clint Eastwood was taking legal action. Clint Eastwood files a lawsuit. This was a coordinated smear. 3 days after the disastrous interview, a bombshell headline exploded across every major news network. Clint Eastwood files multi-million-dollar lawsuit against network for defamation and media manipulation. Clint wasn't just calling out the network, he was holding them legally accountable. The lawsuit claimed the interview was a premeditated ambush. Producers manipulated audience reactions to make Clint look bad. Madeline was instructed to push Clint until he either snapped or could be edited to look unhinged. Leaked hot mic footage proved the show intended to trap him from the start. And the biggest accusation? Defamation with intent to harm his career and reputation. Clint wasn't just suing for himself. He was making an example out of them. And the network, they were panicking. Leaked emails and footage. Expose the truth. As if the lawsuit wasn't bad enough, the internet wasn't done exposing them. A former producer, a whistleblower who had worked behind the scenes on Madeline's show, came forward. And what they revealed? Absolute corruption. They leaked internal emails that proved everything Clint was saying. Producers were instructed to make sure Clint stumbles. Audience members were pre-selected based on their willingness to react negatively to Clint. Madeline was given pre-written talking points designed to bait Clint into an argument. And then, the worst one. An email from a senior executive to Madeline Carter and her producers before the interview. Do whatever you need to. We need a viral moment. Make him look bad. Boom. This wasn't journalism. It was a hit job. And now, the world knew it. Public outrage. They lied to everyone. The leaked emails spread like wildfire. Exposed. Network planned to sabotage Clint Eastwood. Before interview even started. This wasn't journalism. It was a smear campaign. They tried to destroy Clint, but they destroyed themselves instead. The backlash? Unstoppable. Viewers were furious. Hollywood figures started speaking out. More former employees of the network began sharing their own horror stories. Comment sections were brutal. So they admit they lied to the audience? And we're supposed to trust them again? If they did this to Clint, how many others have they done it to? This is the moment the media lost all credibility. The network had spent years controlling the narrative. Now, the narrative was controlling them. The network faces massive consequences. Advertisers are leaving. Inside the network's headquarters, chaos had turned into full-blown collapse. Their credibility was in ruins. Major advertisers were cutting ties. Stock prices were plummeting. Then came the final blow. A major corporate sponsor, one of the biggest in the industry, publicly announced they were severing all ties. We cannot support a platform that engages in deceptive journalism. Effective immediately, we are ending our sponsorship of this network. Boom, millions lost overnight. And once one sponsor left, the rest followed. Within 48 hours, over half of the network's advertisers had pulled out. And just like that, the money was gone. Madeline Carter disappears. Nobody wants to work with her. Madeline Carter had once been the queen of viral interviews. Now, she was radioactive. Her show had been shut down. Her network had cut ties, and no other station wanted to touch her. Desperate for sympathy, she went on a podcast and tried to play the victim. The way people are attacking me is just proof of how toxic our culture has become. It backfired instantly. Oh, now she wants to talk about harassment after spending years ruining other people's reputations. She wasn't doing her job. She was setting people up. And she got caught. Madeline, you made a career out of cancelling others. Welcome to the consequences. By the end of the month, Madeline deleted her social media, announced she was taking a break from public life, disappeared completely, and just like that, her career was over. The network tries to settle the lawsuit. Clint refuses to back down. After weeks of legal battles, the network tried to settle. They knew they couldn't win. The final terms? A multi-million-dollar payout to Clint Eastwood. A full, public apology from the network. A commitment to review and revise their interview practices. And the biggest consequence? Clint's lawsuit had set a precedent. From now on, networks couldn't get away with manipulating interviews. They knew if they tried, they could get sued into the ground. Everything had changed. Clint Eastwood's final words. They did it to themselves. A week after the case was settled, reporters finally caught up with Clint. Mr. Eastwood, what do you have to say about everything that happened? Clint smirked, took a sip of his coffee and said, they did it to themselves. Mic drop. The clip instantly went viral. Clint Eastwood just summed up the entire case in 4 words. He didn't just win, he changed the game forever. This is why you never mess with a legend. And just like that, the fight was over. But the message would never be forgotten. Because now, the media knew that the American people weren't falling for their tricks anymore. Madeline Carter thought she could escape the fallout. Her network thought they could spin the story. The media thought they could distract the public. They were all wrong. Because this wasn't just another media scandal. This was a reckoning. And Clint Eastwood, he wasn't just walking away victorious. He was changing the game forever. The show gets cancelled. No one trusts them anymore. For years, the Madeline Carter Show was one of the most watched programs on television. Now, it was poison. Viewership had dropped by 70%. Advertisers had abandoned ship. The comment sections were flooded with backlash. The network tried to hold on, hoping the controversy would fade. It didn't. Then, after weeks of relentless pressure, the inevitable happened. Effective immediately, the Madeline Carter Show has been cancelled. We thank our viewers for their support and remain committed to fair journalism moving forward. It was over. Madeline's show was dead. And Madeline, she was next. Madeline Carter's career is over. Nobody wants to work with her. Madeline had spent years tearing others down. She had ambushed countless guests. She had twisted narratives to fit her agenda. She had built a career on manipulation. Now, it had all backfired. No network would hire her. No sponsors would touch her. Even her own colleagues were distancing themselves. She tried to save herself. She went on a podcast, claiming she had been unfairly targeted. The way people are attacking me is just proof of how toxic our culture has become. It backfired instantly. Wait, weren't you the one attacking Clint? Madeline, you spent years cancelling people. Now it's your turn. Funny how the people who love cancel culture suddenly hate it when it happens to them. By the end of the month, Madeline deleted her social media, announced she was taking a break from public life, disappeared completely. And just like that, her career was over. The network faces consequences, fined for media manipulation. But it wasn't just Madeline who paid the price. The entire network was under fire. Lawsuits were piling up. Regulators were investigating. More whistleblowers were coming forward. Then came the final blow. Breaking. Major news. Network fined for manipulating interviews and spreading false narratives. A $20 million fine. Publicly exposed for deception. Their credibility gone. And the final humiliation. They were forced to issue a public apology to Clint Eastwood. We regret how the interview with Mr. Eastwood was handled. Our network is committed to journalistic integrity and will be implementing new policies to ensure fair treatment of all guests moving forward. Nobody believed them, but they had no choice. They weren't in control anymore. The public was. Clint Eastwood, stronger than ever. And Clint, he didn't just survive, he thrived. His movies saw a massive resurgence in popularity. His interviews were getting millions of views. Fans, new and old, rallied behind him. Because in the age of media manipulation, Clint represented something rare. Authenticity, grit. A man who stood his ground, no matter the cost. At an event weeks later, a reporter asked him about the scandal. "Mr. Eastwood, what do you think about everything that's happened?" Clint smirked, took a sip of his coffee and said, "They did it to themselves." Mic drop. The clip instantly went viral. Clint Eastwood just ended the media in 4 words. This is why legends never die. He didn't just win, he changed the game forever. And just like that, the story was over. But the message would never be forgotten. Final message, the truth always wins. The media wanted to silence him. They wanted to humiliate him. Instead, they exposed themselves. They lost their credibility. They lost their audience. And they lost the trust of the people. Because in the end, the truth always wins. Call to action. Share this video. If you care about the truth, free speech, and holding the media accountable, share this video because the media wanted you to forget what happened. Don't let them. The end.